Can't get your pre-made cables to curve nicely, plugging them into your GPUs looking for that beautiful arc and you just can't get the cables to train? Looking to make your own cables to get around this problem? Then this video is definitely for you. Hey there folks, and welcome back to the Tower Tech. There is no doubt that the majority of prefabricated, pre-made, sleeved cables are made from really cheap, thin cables that makes it really difficult to get that beautiful sweeping arc, particularly when you've got cables running to your GPUs. I've actually got an existing video on the channel that goes into quite a level of detail on how to make these sorts of cables, including the 24-pin mainboard connectors. There is a link up in the top corner there that will take you to that, but this video will do a very quick recap. So the tools that you're going to need are a really good quality set of crimpers designed for DuPont pins. I recommend a set made by MDPC, the hand filed to the exact specification that you need in order to get the exact sort of bite down on the cables that you need with these sorts of pins. You're going to need two very good quality pair of wire cutters, one really sharp pair that is there for snipping cabling, and then a not blunt but slightly blunter set that is actually for cutting the cables themselves. You're going to need some 18 gauge multi-threaded wire, and of course the female DuPont pins themselves, some plastic ATX plugs or connectors, some decent shrink wrap. Make sure that you look for the right kind of size that's designed for sleeving cables. Actually, there's all sorts of websites you can go to that have this stuff kind of pre-cut, makes the process much simpler. You'll need a lighter to melt or shrink that cable down depending on what you're doing. I have looked at gas torches and stuff like that in the past, but if I'm being frank with you guys, then a lighter is going to do a much better job. You're going to need some sleeving, of course. Again, I recommend MDPC, and some pin removers in case you make some mistakes. Now, let's get into the process. You need to pre-crimp your pins. That's 3 clicks, making sure the wings are facing the right direction in the jaws, and then strip about 3mm off of your 18 gauge wire. Here is the most important part of the process. This is going to be the difference between getting that beautiful curve arc or not, and that is to make sure that you orientate the natural curve of the wire in the direction that you're going to want it inside your case. All of this stuff comes off a spool. There is a natural curve where it has been spooled and wrapped around what is likely a cardboard spool in the shop. It's very difficult to train wires in directions other than in this curve. So getting the pins on the wires in the right way so that when you push them into the plugs, you get that nice natural curve come out. You're not fighting against its natural instinct, the natural way it wants to bend. That's what's really going to get you that beautiful curve in your case. Once you've worked out the orientation, and guys, that's going to be different depending on what sort of GPU you've got and the direction that you want the cables to go, you need to crimp those DuPont pins down onto the wire. When you do this, there are 2 sets of wings on those DuPont pins. There's a long pair of wings and a short pair of wings. You're going to want to make sure that the long pair of wings are actually over the plastic sheathing of the cable. They're actually going to bite down into that plastic sheathing, and the short pins, or the short wings should I say, they're actually going to clamp down on the wires themselves. Once you've got that lined up properly, return it to your crimper and crimp that all the way down. Again, reminder guys, if you want more detailed explanation for this, do go back to my other video where I explore this in a little bit more depth. Repeat the process now for each wire. Again, making sure you've got the orientation of the curve in the right direction. Actually, what I do is I pre-crimp all of my cables before I start putting the sleeving down. That allows me to lay them down each one that's going to be inside the previous one that you made, and make that cable just slightly shorter. Again, that's going to aid that natural arc, that natural bend in the cables. Not a lot shorter, just a little bit shorter. Don't go too OTT, otherwise you're going to end up with, you know, sharp bends in your cabling. And again, that really assists, really aids in getting that beautiful arc in your cabling. Now you actually need to get the sleeving on there. You need to measure this out quite carefully. Typically the sleeving is quite stretchy, so it's quite important when you measure it that you don't actually stretch the cable out, because when you release that, of course, it's going to be centimeters shorter than you want it. You want each end of your sleeving to line up between the long pair of wings and the short pair of wings on the DuPont pins, or at each end of your cables. I find a pinch and trace method is the easiest way, making sure that you fully release the cable between each pinch and trace, so to make sure that you're not stretching it out. You need to melt the end of your sleeving to stop it from fraying. Do this with a lighter, holding the flame close but not actually touching the sleeving, and as soon as you see the sleeving starting to melt and bead, feather it down carefully with your fingers, being careful not to pinch the sleeving together. You then need to feed your cable into your sleeving. Initially you're going to find this is going to go in okay. After a while your DuPont pin is going to get stuck on your sleeving. You can overcome this by bunching up your sleeving and then pinching down on the DuPont pin and releasing it, repeating this over and over, and you will edge the cable increasingly and incrementally into your sleeving. You need to use some of your shrink wrap. Now we are going to be using something called the shrink wrapless method, get that right, which seems a bit counterintuitive. Michael, what you're talking about, you're putting shrink wrap on there, but stay tuned, all will make sense. So making sure that your cabling is lined up between the two sets of wings on your DuPont pins, slide over the top of that your shrink wrap, making sure that that sticks out 1 or 2 millimeters slightly further than the sleeving out onto the pin. Now use your lighter. You're going to want the tip of the flame to just touch around the edge of the shrink wrap, predominantly at the end that is orientated towards the pin, making sure you turn the cable. You're going to see that shrink wrap bite down. Don't worry if it starts to glow a little bit, but at this point you want to take it away from the flame and you want to cut that shrink wrap and actually tear it off. If you've done that all right, what you're going to find is that you've actually made a bond between the sleeving and the cable underneath, actually knitting those things together. So you've actually pulled the heat shrink away entirely, but you've actually bonded the sleeving to the cabling. So that's why it's called the heat shrinkless method. There's no heat shrink left at the end. And then when you push that into your ATX plugs or connectors, you can't see the melted portion of that sleeving. It really creates a much neater look than you will typically find where you've left the heat shrink on. Continue to do this and repeat for each of your cablings, making sure that you've got sleeving that matches your color scheming. Worry a little bit less about the orientation of your PSU plug. Don't ignore it entirely, but the reality is as you route your cables behind your system, you're probably going to change that orientation a little bit anyway. The orientation that's really important to worry about is the one that you're going to see, making sure that you get that nice arc. If you need to split wires, again, go to my previous video. You can essentially solder 2 wires together. Much better process than actually trying to jam 2 wires into one DuPont pin, which is just going to be messy. It's also not going to work. Avoid trying to do that. You know, take the effort to actually strip some cables down, solder them together. Again, loads of detail in that in the previous video. Once you've completed your cable, plug it into a spare socket on your PSU, power your computer up, and do a pin by pin check with a multimeter to make sure that you've got the correct voltage on each pin and that the cable is wired up correctly. If you don't, if you've made a mistake, you're going to get magic smoke. It's going to be a very expensive problem and mistake. This is a bit of a tedious process, but well worth the effort. So there we go. That's how you create those beautiful arcs for your GPU power cables. It's all about using the natural bend that is created in the wire when it is wound on the spool. It's very difficult to train prefabricated, pre-made wires because they're so thin, they've got no natural arc, and they've often been packed quite flat as well. They're made of cheap thin wires. You're just not going to get that kind of arc that you're going to get out of creating a decent set of cables using 18 gauge high quality wiring. So there we go, guys. There is a video all about how you create beautiful arced custom sleeved cables. Please like and share this video if you've enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're not, there's plenty of great content to come. I hope you're really well wherever in the world you are, and I will see you in my next one.